Welcome to STRIcast. This week, I'm joined by Stella Rixon. So, Stella, great to have you on the podcast. Do you want just to explain to those listeners who may not have met you in the industry, what you do, what's your job role within STRI?
Thanks, Christian. I'm Stella Rixon and I am a senior agronomist. I work mostly in the south of the UK and occasionally I get to go on nice sunny foreign trips.
And so in terms of, just for those listeners who may not be aware of exactly the kind of jobs that an agronomist gets involved with, what's your day-to-day? What kind of sports do you cover? What kind of things do you do in a week's typical visits for you?
A bit of everything, really. I like the diversity. So golf is one of the mainstays, but we also go and do horse sports, we do tennis, we do bowling, sometimes private lawns, football pitches, winter sports, you name it, anything that a sport might be played on. Or, as I say, private lawns occasionally, Buckingham Palace being a former one.
That's pretty fancy.
Very fancy, yeah.
Cool. And is it just about the grass, or are there other things that you tend to look at as well when you do your visits?
Well, personally, a love of mine is ecology. So I'm always looking at, well, birds, the bees, the nice things like that as well. So for me, yeah, it's obviously about the sport's performance and its appearance, but also the wider environment and whether we're doing the best thing we can for biodiversity as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stella. And that's really good to understand a little bit about what an agronomist does in their job. So we're here today to talk a little bit about ITM, or integrated turf management. I think really in the context of where we've perhaps been going over recent years and decades in terms of legislation, regulation, the fact that over that time period of years and decades, we have had regulation changes. We've also been looking at active substances and plant protection products, which are less harmful to the environment, to humans, to bystanders, perhaps need a little bit more work to get the best out of them when we're using them to solve a problem we may have. But more recently, we've had some legislation, the sustainable use regulations that were put forward in the EU by the European Commission, which would have been a quite dramatic change in legislation, regulatory environment for what we may have in our toolkit as turf managers, or those that work with turf managers, to actually combat problems. And what it's done, I think, is help refocus everyone's mind on integrated turf management. So I think it's a good opportunity today on STRIcast to talk a little bit about the tech, the agronomics behind integrated turf management and what that really means. So to kick off with, as a turfgrass agronomist, what does ITM mean to you? What does it mean for your day job and those that you work with?
I guess I often actually call back on my ecology background, actually. So it's about looking at the whole picture, not just the small parts of it. So by that, I mean kind of using all the strings to your bow, as it were. So you've got to look at the biology aspects, the chemistry aspects, and the physical and environmental aspects. So, yeah, it's trying to put that picture together. And it can be quite tricky because obviously, you know, your mind's focused on one particular thing, probably the disease or pest that's cropped up, but there's a whole lot more to look at it around that as to why it's there and how you might best treat it.
And I think that's a pretty good summary of what you're looking at when it comes to ITM. And in terms of turf managers that you work with, who you are liaising with on a day-to-day basis, what do you think ITM means to them? Is there a disconnect between agronomists, scientists, maybe the industry and turf managers, or are we all on the same page? Do we think that everyone understands really what ITM is all about?
Well, I guess the day we're all on the same page, I might be able to retire. So, no, I wouldn't say we're all on the same page. Yeah, there's a lot to get your head around, isn't there, really? And I guess it's a bit mixture that I see in the industry. So some people are sort of embracing it and really trying to do it well and are successful in doing so. And then others, obviously, maybe not doing it quite so well for various reasons. And then also sort of living up to expectations. So the one thing I would say is I see a lot of anxiety around pest and disease control. And, you know, I totally understand that because it is a high pressure job. And the, you know, trying to meet the expectations of your end user could mean that you could potentially, you know, make a panic decision, or, you know, not trust in the products to work, or maybe, you know, maybe try and throw too many things at it and then get lost in which one's going to help and which one's not going to help. And yeah, so it's a confusing picture. And, you know, not only have you got the sort of expectations of your users to live up to, but also I find turf managers are probably sometimes their own worst enemy, because they're, you know, many are perfectionists and they don't want to see a small blemish on their turf either. So we have to find a happy medium, don't we?
Absolutely. And I think often we can get a bit nerdy and geeky about the grass, and I think it's we perhaps see more than our end users do, and for us, because we see it, we acknowledge it, and it kind of eats away the back of our brain going, oh, but I could see that little bit of disease there, or that little bit of moss creeping into that green, and we kind of think we've got to do something. But perhaps a little bit, ITM is saying, okay, well, we need to understand what our threshold is, we need to understand perhaps what that recipe for us is on our particular sporting venue. And so in your view, I mean, and I've heard many conversations over the past about the ITM program, the one program to rule them all. In your experience, is there that magic program that's going to solve it all? Or is it in reality, as we probably suspect, something which is more, well, you've got to tailor it to what you're seeing at that time?
Yeah, very much so. You can tailor it to what you're seeing. You have to tailor it to what you're seeing, and understand your particular site and, you know, why it's getting those particular challenges. I think probably you can get a bit confused. You know, there's lots of options in the marketplace. And once you really understand what each one does, I suppose that makes your job easier as to which ones to choose. But maybe, you know, if it is all a bit overwhelming, I'd say if you go with a recognised supplier and they have proven research and facts, then they've put these programs together to work. So, you know, you can choose that option and go with one supplier, one manufacturer, if that's the way you wish to go. But equally, you can also put a program together yourself with a bit of knowledge is power.
And I guess it's, as with all things in life, if you're struggling, if you don't know where to turn, ask, and there is plenty of help out there, whether it's agronomists, whether it's colleagues that at other golf courses or other sports facilities. There is help available out there in the industry, isn't there?
There certainly is. I would also caveat that a little bit, though, is that, you know, as with any subject in life, is if you take lots of people's opinions, you can also get a little bit into sort of murky waters.
Yeah.
get a little bit lost and confused as to, you know, which way to go. So it is important to try and sort of step back and I would say keep it simple. So as I say, look at those facts that are before you on your site. So the biology aspect, you know, the biology of that particular pest or disease. Ask yourself why. That's the question you need to keep asking, is why is it there? And once you understand why it's turning up or when it's turning up, then that makes it a lot easier to decide how best to approach it.
I think very sage, wise words there on how to tackle those kind of problems. So you visit a lot of golf courses, sports facilities in the course of your day job. What do you see as being the main agronomic challenges out there that people have to tackle?
Well, it's always the weather, isn't it? It's always the fault of the weather. But, you know, joking aside, that is dictating pretty much everything to do with growing something outside. You know, we're not in a greenhouse situation, so we can't control any of those aspects. So it's trying to kind of keep an eye on the temperature and the amount of rainfall and when the rainfall's coming and how much humidity there is and leaf moisture. You know, there's a lot of aspects to this that you need to keep your eye on to understand when and where things are going to crop up. So I think, weather's always the biggest problem. And then also I think getting to grips with the chemistries of products, because I find myself more and more actually looking at the health and safety data sheets to really find out what's in things, because it's not always that evident. And then once you know what's in things, you can obviously, again, make a better informed choice. So, yeah, it's can be a bit murky as to what products are and what's in them and why they do what they're supposed to do. So you need to inform yourself.
And I think that kind of emphasises the point you made before about making sure that you understand why things do what they do, how they work, what's the problem you're trying to solve. And I guess in this case, knowledge really is power about why you're seeing a particular problem on your green or your sports pitch, and then actually drilling down into the key challenges that are causing it. How do you think having this integrated approach, this, if you like, stepping back and taking the big picture approach, actually can help turf managers?
Well, hopefully by, looking at the whole picture and really understanding it, obviously it helps you get it right. So you can achieve that utopia of the healthy turf with as little sort of pressure from disease and pests as possible, so problems are minimised. But yeah, obviously there's still an element of we haven't got a carte blanche to put, the old style chemicals wall to wall anymore. So there is an element of, okay, if we have to focus our approach and it's in the in-play areas only, we've got to let some areas potentially have damage that we weren't expecting or people weren't accepting of in the past, and we've got to re-educate the end user on that one.
And how important do you think that expectation of the end user, the player, is on shaping perhaps how fast we have to jump when it comes to integrated management and the problems that we face?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. It's, it's the main aspect that keeps turf managers awake at night. So I think, one of the biggest parts of my job is trying to put that forward as well in good communication, so that, so you don't, well, A, you don't have sleepless nights, but B, you don't get pushed down a line that you don't want to really go down either. Yeah. So, and actually I find clubs are generally receptive, but yeah, we all need to be on the same fair playing field, don't we?
We certainly do.
Yeah, getting people to understand. And also if you talk about money as well, that usually helps. So, how much it would actually cost if you were going to try and treat every square metre, or, even if that was viable. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got to come down to the realities of the situation, the realities of the economics, the resource and expectation. And it's probably something, if I'm honest, we don't talk quite so much about when it comes to integrated management. I put my hand up, I'm guilty of it as much as anybody. We get very nerdy about the science and the tech and the turf and the soil, but expectation, end user perception is a huge part, because that drives forward a lot of the management we do to produce visually or quality-wise those surfaces. So I think that probably is something we need to focus a little bit more on, whether that's through education, knowledge sharing, and also highlighting what expectations can do. If we want to achieve sustainable integrated management, we have to get the end users to understand their role in this as well.
Yeah, very much so.
In terms of integrated approach, taking that sort of holistic, sort of wide open view of turf management, what do you believe, or what do you see perhaps are things we could do more of or do better to help with a wider or more focused integrated turf management implementation?
As in sort of the turf manager, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, any turf managers, but also sort of anybody in the stakeholders within that kind of the golfing or the sporting world. What do you think we need to, what do you think we need to do really to help roll out more closely ITM approaches?
That's a big topic. Certainly embrace technology, because that is coming and it will make your life and decision making a lot easier. You really need to, as I say, analyze and research. So I think companies can make that a bit easier as well, because I still find Sometimes, product labels aren't as clear as they could be. There's use of terminology that, say with a chemical, systemic contact, it doesn't necessarily really delve into where on the plant it's working, that particular chemical, why you might use it. So the clarity on labelling and understanding what products do and how they do it. You shouldn't really have to look at the health and safety data sheet to really understand what's in a product. But unfortunately, that is the case for some at this point in time. So really help people to analyse what the problem is and why it's there. And then, the turf manager really does need to research their foe, as it were. So if it's a particular disease or a pest that's turning up, why is it that exactly where it is? Why is it turning up there? What's the weather like when it's turning up there? So, often these pest diseases might turn up in the same sort of places on your site. So why is that? Is it, say, leather jackets are turning up in the wetter spots on your golf course? So start looking at, drainage answers rather than immediately reaching for your chemicals.
And I think that is a large part of the preventative approach, isn't it? Is really drilling down into why a problem's occurring, because something is infecting the turf or living in that habitat that may be causing us an issue because, for whatever reason, I guess we are creating a circumstance, a situation where it can thrive and reproduce. So I guess if we can drill down into that and we can then change and modify that environment, which favours what we're trying to do and achieve, is going to be the best option of all, really, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And then if I was to bring a second thing in there, it's actually trust in your plant protection products, because I still see, I guess, I suppose in the response to the fact that these products they're not like the old school ones where you put it on and nothing came back for, months and weeks. We're not in that ball game anymore, excuse the pun. Products, they do work, but I mean, the point is they haven't gone through registration without actually being rigorously tested. So they do work. They have been proven to work, and that's not just in a laboratory scenario, it's out in the field as well. So you have to trust that these things will work, because I still hear, people go, oh, I tried that and it didn't work. But they don't then sort of think, actually, why didn't it work for me? Was it the timing? Was it the application? Was it how I put it on? Was it spray drift? There's so many different variables. So yeah, it is difficult, and it's not a quick fix of grab a product and that's the job done. So we do have to be a little bit more scientific about it.
We have to work hard, don't we, to make sure that we do all the things right to get the best possible outcome, which is, I guess, no different to most parts of our lives. If we want to have the best outcome, we've got to make sure that we do all the hard yards to do it, and getting the right solution down the right time, in the right way is having identified the appropriate pest, weed or disease we're looking to treat. You mentioned there technology and innovation. I think that's an area for obvious opportunity when it comes to integrated turf management. What do you see as perhaps being some of the technologies or opportunities we should and could be exploiting more to help with our ITM turf management programs?
The turf apps that are coming out now are really good. So, and they will be specific, or certainly more specific for your site. So, certainly humidity and temperature is a huge one when you're talking about turf diseases. So, yeah, different turf diseases will prefer different temperatures and humidities. So, these systems can now give you some sort of warning when they're likely to turn up. And then add AI into that as well that's coming. You can actually train these apps as well to really understand when it's turning up on your site. So this is going to make it more and more effective as a tool. And then things that we already do, I would definitely say you need to be looking at your GDD, your growth potential, so you really understand, the growth rate of the plant. That will give you an indication of how quickly chemicals are going to last in the plant, or which best chemical to choose to use, contact, systemic. And also it will give you an idea of how quickly organic matter is going to build up. And organic matter is a massive part of disease prevention, because as soon as you've got organic matter, you've got more dew holding and more moisture holding, and then you've got more disease. So those sort of things are key. So it's being able to measure them on your site and keep tabs on them.
And keep tracking them and keep tracking how effective you're being. And I think that sometimes with integrated management is the hardest part of it, is to look hard into your inner soul, into all the dark corners, and go, actually, what is working, what isn't working, what do I need to do differently, and perhaps how do I do that to achieve the result, especially when it comes to managing the soil and that soil growing environment, which is vital for the biology in the soil, but also the grass plant as well. So yeah, I think knowledge and sort of how we understand that growing environment is critical. And I think that's something that will be continually something we have to work on, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what do you think is the role of an agronomist in terms of promoting ITM, how it's utilised in the field, and also education and how we pass on best practice and knowledge?
Yeah, well, I think you just touched on it really. It's communication, and communication. So it's just, obviously talking directly to the turf managers and saying, what I've seen in my travels, the benefit of being an agronomist is you go so many different places, you see different people trying to control things in different ways, and you pick up tips. So, I can say X, Y, Z has worked here, and here, and this is why. And you're a similar site, so I would, look at trying those too, have a chat with that person and see what you think. But also we have the benefit of obviously our trials ground here in STRI, so I can actually see ITM working, so I can speak from a point of view of, it does work, believe in it, but just understand how it's going to work for you and how to make that work for you. So yeah, that's the message to the the turf manager effectively. And then just as importantly is to speak to their bosses.
Yeah.
So speak to whoever's paying the bills, and get them to understand that, that we're in a different environment now, and, you need a budget for this, and you need the technology, you need the weather station, you need to be able to understand your humidity and your dew, etc., etc. So, give your turf manager a chance with giving them the technology to be able to predict these things and manage it correctly.
And it certainly seems from what you've been saying in terms of the reality of the of turf manager's job out there, it's become a lot more data driven, a lot more, not these were technical because that's not necessarily correct, but data and how different systems, different processes interact is perhaps more at the forefront, whereas maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was a bit more experiential driven intuition. I know my course, I know my environment, and it's almost like it's coming from the gut, whereas now there's a little bit more of a drive for, we need to have some metrics on this. We need to be able to track actually what's going on, what we're doing. So would you say that's a fair assumption?
Yeah, I agree. One thing I've always sort of pondered is it's so hard to teach green fingers, whether you're talking about turf management or horticulture or just growing a plant at home. That is something that's quite a gut sense, if you like. You can either look at that plant and know it's not happy, or you haven't got a clue and you look at it as a plant and it's a green thing. So yeah, it's very hard to teach that. That's either something you kind of have or haven't. But obviously the new technology makes that a whole lot easier and then adds to that as well. So yeah, you'll get sort of maybe your more experienced old school turf managers who can largely do it by gut, but even then the technology helps again to sort of forewarn really. So at least forewarned, forearmed, you know something could be coming. You're in high pressure disease period, if you like, and then it's up to you. It still requires an experienced eye to go, okay, well, I do need to react to this, or I'll just wait and see.
And I think often it's when we talk about data and quantification, it's turf management by numbers, but in reality all we're doing is providing insight into the situation to help more informed decisions, perhaps decisions quicker and earlier in a cycle before seeing a problem occurring. But experience, learning, that hands-on, tangible sort of tactile, being in contact with the turf, seeing it, smelling it, seeing it, sort of sometimes even hearing it, how water moves through the profile, can all be really valuable, and going hand in hand with the data to help inform that decision, that knowledge, if you like, about what's actually occurring.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I suppose if anything, if I'd take it out of our industry, I'd liken it to going to the doctors, and you might have, all these blood tests done, and the doctor says, well, there's nothing showing up on your blood test, but they need to really listen to the individual and go, if the individual's saying, yes, I feel there's a problem, and explain why, then there's something in that. So it's putting those two halves together. You can't do it all by just data. The data still needs to be analysed by someone with experience.
It has to inform ultimately a human decision.
Yeah.
And which I think is really important when we talk about integrated management and data. Okay, sort of thinking about now the future, looking into that crystal ball, where do we see, or where do you see in particular, the future going in terms of turf management, and sort of how ITM is going to be sort of worked into what we do in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, for good reasons, we're not going to have, suddenly stronger chemicals that kill all chemicals, and neither would we wish to. So actually what will take their place is the technology. So as I say, the artificial intelligence technology will really help that decision making greatly. So it'll mean that all your data can be sort of pulled down into one place, and it can put it all together for you. So, if the temperature and the humidity and the leaf wetness and the amount of nutrient in the plant is such that all of these things ring alarm bells, it'll be able to tell you that and say, okay, now you're really in high disease territory, etc. So it will make the decision making a lot easier. So hang in there, folks. It's the technology's coming to help us. It
is, and I think I certainly see talking across a variety of aspects of the turf industry, there are lots of technologies being worked. There's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of development work. And those things can be slow to come to market. They obviously need to be well validated, well tested, to make sure that any outputs from them, any interpretation, is obvious and is usable to the user. But there's some interesting stuff I've seen over recent years, even just going to something as simple as a robot mower, and some of the benefits that have been seen from the robot mowers, which are essentially similar versions that those that you might find on your home lawn. But people are seeing benefits of that super frequent mowing in terms of reduction in casts and cast smearing, less disease, less weeds. And it's kind of that may not be instantly intuitive as a result of, well, I've got something just to help me with my resourcing issue, but actually I'm seeing all these other side benefits as well. And I think seeing that emerge over these recent years has been quite interesting to me.
Yeah, and like you say, these things can work through the night, so you can get them knocking the dew off all night for you, and happy days. You don't even need a chemical involved.
A bit of a challenging question for you now. So as an agronomist, part of the things that you will do on a day-to-day visit maybe to go and collect some data from different turf surfaces, but there are solutions out there, companies like eNano, for example, with creating their automated robotic systems and AI systems, so Sprout and Oscar, to collect data. Do you see those as a threat as an agronomist, or do you see them as is it doing you out of a job, or do you see it actually it's helping me do my job better?
Very much the latter, because the data is only as good as as good as the areas you look at and the areas you test. So obviously, the more that these things can collect over a wider area, the more insight you have. You haven't got the time on site to be able to do that, cover that sort of area. So no, very much so, it's doing your work for you. But as I say, there's still a requirement to analyse it and understand what it means. So.
And what do you think, as an STRI agronomist, we should be doing or are doing to further enhance the knowledge and practical use of ITM?
Just trying to every day do education and communication, really. So make sure that I'm on top of everything. So understanding myself what the new technologies are, how they work, and then being able to communicate that. And also, having a look at problems people are having, and if something hasn't worked as they'd hoped, really delving down into that and why it didn't, and help them to understand why it didn't, and then, get back on the right track. So don't give up.
Oh, absolutely.
It will all come together.
Yes, but sometimes you have to dig a little, if you pardon the pun, to get beneath the surface of a problem to really get down to the root cause. And sometimes that can come about quickly, but sometimes it takes some time to get to the truth of what's going on.
Yeah.
Just because sometimes when biology goes bad, so to speak, we kind of end up having to do a little bit more. It's a little harder to perhaps spot the exact root causes of what goes on. So
yeah. And I think if I was to end on something, I suppose it can get that there's mixed messages out in the industry. So, for instance, don't use iron at any cost because it will spoil your soil biology. That could be a bit misleading, and I certainly wouldn't want to do an autumn without any iron. So that's one key sort of mixed message I come up with regularly. But maybe the other one would be sort of trying to promote the fine grasses, again, for good reasons, but you could accidentally sort of be ending up going towards more organic matter because you're sort of doing too little in terms of disturbance, as it were. So it's tightrope walking, really.
It is.
It's not easy, but...
And that, I think, is, for me, is always looking into the future, seeing what's on the near horizon a little bit further off in terms of technology, making sure that we're keeping abreast about and understanding about what's going on, and that vital to that is it needs to be communicated, and we have to really educate and make sure everyone's aware of those latest developments and what it might mean for them on their golf course or their sports facility. And I think that's a role that certainly I've always enjoyed here at STRI, and I know that others do as well, is that helping others to understand what's going on and why they may see those problems in that situation.
Yeah, it's kept me doing it for 20-something years now. And it's so varied and interesting that I can't see I'd change job anytime soon.
And there's for me, I think the crux of a lot of what we talk about turf management is how do we still enable us to play sport on biology in a natural landscape, in a natural environment, and do that in a way which is as closely in balance with the systems and processes that nature has evolved over millions of years, while still maintaining that playable surface, which is we are managing to meet our specific requirements, whether it's that 46-gram golf ball rolling across the surface, or a team of 30 or a group of 30 rugby players charging around a pitch, and how that has to stand up to the wear and tear of it. And I think for me, it's how do we do that in as holistically, as balanced, in harmony, a harmonious way with nature as possible, but still produce, not at the cost of producing good quality sport surfaces. So that's a challenge that I'll take forward for the rest of my career and see where we get. Well, I think that pretty much wraps us up very nicely in terms of integrated turf management, and perhaps the agronomist's view of that, and what we're doing currently to help promote ITM and that way of thinking. Well, thank you very much, Stella, and thanks to all the listeners who have tuned in to STRIcast this week.